Good evening, everyone. Even though we are on week 11 of COVID, sometimes I feel like I'm an actor in a science fiction movie. I still am somewhat in amazement that I and so many others are all walking around with face masks. In many ways, it is surreal. That being said, it is not only surreal, but it is very, very real. I'm Ronnie Towell, honorary board member of Sephardic Picor Halim. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of Mental Health Resources Division of SPH. For decades, SPH has always considered emotional well-being to be on par with financial and medical well-being. This has manifested itself through the creation of our Mental Health Division. In today's world, and all the more so in the COVID world, emotional well-being is the key to grappling with today's challenges. I urge each and every one of you to take full advantage of the vast amount of resources that are available to you, whether it be our fully confidential call line at 718-787-1300, where you can be referred to any one of dozens of pre-vetted professional outside counselors, or to any one of our professional in-house counselors, which, by the way, provided over 14,000 confidential in-house sessions last year. Or tune in or join in to any of our other special events, lectures, and support groups, or seek confidential guidance with matters such as anxiety, fertility, abuse, and more. Please know that no matter what, you are not alone. So many of our fellow community members are dealing with the very same challenges. All of this is in addition to SPH's holistic approach to our community's needs through our major divisions such as career services, client services, our family division, our food division, our MedStar division, our senior division, our youth division, and our volunteer division. With Hashem's help, as per our pre-Pesach community-wide message, SPH is here for you. Tonight's program is entitled, How Are You Feeling? Really? We've assembled a panel of top-notch experts who will cover many key topics. Tonight's panel will include Dr. David Sitt, who will also be moderating the discussion. Dr. David Sitt is the co-chair of SPH Mental Health Services. He's a specialist in ADHD, depression, and anxiety, and is MBCT certified, which means mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. He's also a tenured professor at Baruch College, where he has been with the psychology department for 20 years. And now I turn it over to Dr. David Sitt.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. It's really an honor to be working with Picor Halim on this amazing event, which we hope will be the beginning of several other talks and panel conversations that we intend to have discussing the areas of mental health. As we all might know, as we all realize, we are in uncharted territories, facing physical distancing, shelter-in-place orders, business and school closures, and widespread loss of jobs, financial security, and even loved ones. This, if you take any one slice of what I just described or of what Ronnie just described, could rattle any of us. But taking in unity is quite a challenging set of circumstances. A recent survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 45% of American adults reported that their mental health was negatively affected with worry and stress and other ailments in response to where we're at with coronavirus. Whether it be post-traumatic stress, confusion, anger, anxiety, stress, substance abuse, the difficulties in marriages, being single at home, being a parent or a child, no one has really been immune to the challenges that we're all facing. Tonight, we're fortunate to have an esteemed panel from across the mental health spectrum to discuss a few topics that we listed, in hopes that this will begin our conversation about how are we all feeling, really. I'd like to introduce our panelists, at which point we'll go through a couple of questions that came our way, each one going through each one of our areas of expertise. And towards the middle or tail end, we'll open up the floor to more questions that might come about. First, I'd like to introduce Simon Nasim, who is the Assistant Director of Case Management at Sephardic Picor Halim. Additionally, he is a supervisor and liaison to SPH's mental health clinic. Simon is a licensed LSCW, or clinical social worker, and he comes from a background in addiction, where he also was trained at the Ackerman Family Counseling Center and is EFT certified, emotion focused therapy certified. Simon currently works with many couples and families within the community, sharing his holistic and humanistic views of love and relationships. Our next panelist is Dr. Ayla Sit. Dr. Ayla Sit is a co-chair, along with myself, of the Mental Health Services Division of SBH. She is the senior psychologist at NYCBT, a renowned clinic in Manhattan focusing on anxiety, OCD, depression, suicidality, among other conditions, using dialectical behavior therapy and CBT. Dr. Sit is launching a perinatal emotional wellness program. Hopefully, we'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. She also conducts neuropsychological testing for children, adolescents, and adults alongside Dr. Dominic Osiello. Finally, we are very excited to have with us a renowned psychologist who is coming from the Child Mind Institute, Dr. Rachel Busman. Dr. Busman is the Senior Director of the Anxiety Disorder Center, as well as the Director of the Selective Mutism Service at Child Mind Institute. She is the past president of the Selective Mutism Association, which is the nation's largest network of professional families and individuals with selective mutism. In her work at Child Mind Institute, Dr. Busman has extensive experience providing CBT to children, teenagers, and young adults, as well as having specific interest in evaluations and treatments of OCD, separation anxiety, social anxiety, and specific phobias. That was a mouthful, because we are dealing with a lot of expertise in this room in front of us. So we're going to start off this conversation with turning to our panelists, and I'd like to know from each of you, how are you doing, really? And I'd like to start off with Dr. Busman, Rachel. If you could tell us a little bit about how you're doing and how the people around you, both professionally and maybe even personally, are coping.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm Rachel Busman. I'm a clinical psychologist and director of the Anxiety Disorder Center at Child Mind Institute. How am I really? I think as I was thinking about this, a couple things came up. I think it depends on the day, right? So we're in really unprecedented times. And so some days I think feel better than others. Some days are really productive. I'm working from home full time, and I have a son who's learning from home, which means I'm doing some of that e-learning. So some days are really great and productive, and other days aren't as good. And I need to remind myself that what I'm doing is enough. And I think reminding myself that as we remind each other that is important. And in terms of what I'm hearing a lot of just in my work and from colleagues, because I do a lot of anxiety work, is really more about how to navigate the uncertainty in the world right now. And what do I talk with my child about in terms of the uncertainty? I don't want my child to feel stressed, but this is really stressful. So what do I say? A big question is, how do I know what is anxiety versus what's a reasonable stress right now, just given the circumstances? And then really, how do I manage my own anxiety as a caregiver and manage that and sort of recalibrate during this really stressful time? So those, I think, are the biggest things that are just coming up for me professionally and personally.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. We'll get to some of your questions next. Let's now turn to Dr. Ayla Sit and ask, how are you really? I haven't heard directly myself, so.
Thank you, David, for the intro. Similar to Dr. Busman, I would say that some days are easier than others. But overall, if I were to give one word to describe my experience, I would say that I am pretty exhausted often. It's been definitely challenging balancing all the different roles that I have now in one day, of being a teacher, continuing to work from home, and also the meals just don't seem to end. So I'm pretty wiped, and at the same time also feeling grateful and thankful that I can spend more time with my children, which during the regular, when things were more normal, I wouldn't necessarily have that much time to see how they learn, spend just that much more time with them. In terms of the challenges that I've been hearing with my clients, I would say there's been varied experiences, a lot of hopelessness I've been seeing from clients who, are just wondering, like, when will this end, and what would it look like if it did end, and will it end? A lot of anxiety about, managing if this continued, and how do I, again, like Dr. Busman said, like, am I being irrational in my fears, or is it fact? Because a lot of the news is telling me that I should be afraid, and is expressing that to me. And then also in families and in couples, a lot of difficulty in communicating with each other. And a lot more conflict in the home. And for my singles, I would say, often feeling like their lives have somewhat been put on hold if dating is something that's primary for them.
Okay, I'm sure. Thank you, Ayla. We'll get to some of the issues that you raised as we round the table. Next, let's hear, Simon, from you. How are you really? I want to just preempt by letting us know I learned that Simon today has a packed house of 8 children at home. So Simon, we're all very curious. How are you?
Truthfully, I do want to share with you, I'm still sleeping, hoping this dream just wakes us up and say, we've just been dreaming this. I think long ago when all this started, as we saw the masks in China, and we laughed, little did I know, I would be doing humanistic work without no emotion on a screen, talking to a screen to a couple that want to kill themselves, and kill each other. So for me, it's been challenging on a personal level. Earlier on, I was positive and struggled also in bed for a couple of weeks, really struggling with that. And as you said, juggling out the 8 kids and trying to sort of adapt to these new circumstances and new reality. Added to that, sort of trying to figure out my own self and doing my own kind of work. So I'm dealing with the same issues that you guys are, and still struggling with what are we doing in the summer, and we're going to Jersey, and it's camps on and camps off. But I have to share with you, but it's been exciting, learning and bonding in ways that I could never dream of right now with my spouse, my wife, and my kids has been really, really exciting. In terms of what I'm seeing in my own private work, I will share with you, there are kind of 3 couples that are coming my way. There's the solid and the median couples just struggling with their roles right now, struggling to kind of adapt and in these new dynamics and sort of be there for each other and cheer each other on. And then at the same time, we're seeing the newlyweds, and that means also the newlyweds or the newly burst families. So it's been a bit of a struggle, kind of sort of navigating right through it all. But like I shared with you, as I did very earlier on when this hit, I said to my wife, I said, this is going to be a tough one. So why don't we do a deal now? We're going to write a contract and we're going to make an agreement. Anything that's said through this period is null and void, and nothing is going to stay. So we did very well. And as I left tonight, she said, I love you. So that's where I am.
Great. I love it. That's great. Amazing advice right at the outset. So even if everyone just takes one nugget from each of what our panelists said thus far, I think that could take us a long way. But we're going to get into more detail at this point. I guess just briefly, I'll say how I'm doing. I'm doing, like many of you said, ups and downs, good days and bad days. As my good friend, Aleva Shalom, DJ Cohen, used to also talk about, we have good days, we have bad days, we have our struggles that kick our butts, and then we have days where we see hope, silver linings. We have to force some of that out with gratitude, force some of that out with tending to ourselves, with whether meditation or breathing or other self-care techniques. So good days and bad days, but hopefully this will help us all get more good days out of it. Let's turn now back into to the panel and go through some questions that we had gotten over the past few days. So Dr. Busman, you had alluded to a question or a comment about differentiating within children and adolescents, the difference between anxiety and stress, and how we can cope with either of those two if they are different, and any guidance that you can give our audience.
For sure. It's a good question because I think people feel really confused sometimes because this is such a stressful time and we really have no meter for really any anchor anywhere of what this is supposed to be like. And so it's normal to feel stress. And so your child might show their stress by maybe telling you I'm stressed, but a lot of kids and teenagers don't do that. They show us through their behavior or their sleep or their mood, their appetite. And so it's really normal to see some minor fluctuations in mood, naps for younger kids, some irritability, some clinginess, or some whining. Like those little fluctuations are really, yes, concerning, but not cause for a huge concern. I think what we really want to think about when we're trying to differentiate between reasonable stress and something that's more of a concern is when we see persisting changes. So like really persisting mood changes, right? Or really a change from what your child is usually like, right? So if your child is generally kind of happy-go-lucky kid who rolls with the punches, a kid that's not rolling with the punches well, that could be a signal that maybe something is a little bit more of a concern. Similarly, like really specific or persisting changes in sleep or appetite, those things we wouldn't really expect, right? Yes, kids are adapting to this new normal, so to speak, but if your kids are really up and not able to sleep, these are reasons for more concern and when you want to get more assistance.
Okay, so you pointed out some signals to look out for, basic things like sleep or changes in eating habits, and anything that you also would comment in terms of the emotional meltdowns that might happen, or
Sure.
we're all facing Zoom. Our kids are in Zoom mode, or whether they be young children I'm speaking to, and even the older children who are just, there's a rebellion happening, understandably so. Can you speak to some of that?
Absolutely. So sometimes we see withdrawal. So we definitely want to be on the lookout for kids just trying completely withdrawing, right? So teenagers are naturally wanting to see their friends and really their social life is so important. So a little bit of wanting to get away from parents or siblings is normal, right? But a complete withdrawal is definitely a cause for concern. Similarly, some of these like tantrums or whining or just, I've had too much of Zoom today, those are, again, reasonable given people being in close quarters or just kind of together all the time. But I think things that go sort of beyond, so in higher in intensity, or that they're really persisting and it's not something you feel like you can get under control yourself, that's when we worry more than it just being sort of these minor fluctuations in just a really unprecedented time, causing really unreasonable reactions, which sometimes are big.
All right, a lot to consider, and I think each one of us has to think about our own children, where they are in that spectrum.
Absolutely.
And also, as you're saying, kind of remind ourselves that this is normal under the circumstances. Actually, I heard someone quote Viktor Frankl recently in his book Man's Search for Meaning, says extraordinary reactions in extraordinary times is ordinary, right? That's normal. Mm-hmm. It's normal to expect extraordinary responses when we have so much difficulty that we're facing at this particular time. So thank you, Dr. Busman. We'll come back around in a bit. Let's turn now to Dr. Ayla Sit. Ayla, you were addressing at one point the concerns that are coming up in your practice, that you're speaking to some young adults, singles, whether they're living at home, maybe they moved back out to home, during the pandemic, or maybe they're still alone in their apartments for whatever reasons, and that you were facing some themes that were coming up. Could you speak a little bit to what you've been seeing in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. So as it relates to the singles who are still living alone in the city, or living alone in an apartment, a lot of what I've been seeing is feelings of loneliness and isolation. And, also if they are, people who are actively looking for a partner and dating, I've also been seeing a lot of, frustration and feelings like time is being wasted in their search for this partner because things aren't normal. So a lot of anxiety about that, of, when will I find someone? Will it happen? Can it happen? Am I wasting time? What can I do to make this happen quicker? And so what I would say is there's a few different ways that I would approach this. If you are someone who has tried the dating, through video or apps, I would say there are people who are doing it, and in some ways they have been successful, and a lot of my clients have been successful. And so I don't think that if that is the way that you want to approach it, and you are approaching dating by using these apps, then I would think about the silver lining in all of this. And a lot of my clients have been able to see it is, there's a lot less pressure in dating through video, right? You don't have to necessarily think about what you're going to wear. You don't necessarily have to think about where are we going to go. I need to think of something creative for us to do. And you're also not investing in a full night with someone where in the end you might say, hey, this was a bust. I'm not necessarily interested in that person. So I've also found that a lot of people have been experiencing the dating through online or phone to be actually forming deeper connections, because you're focusing on conversation, you're focusing on similarities, and in that way it's been a stronger connection in a quicker amount of time. And then I would say that there are people who aren't taking to the online dating. And if that's you, you don't have to do it, right? Like, if that's not what you want to focus on and you don't like doing it this way, don't do it that way. But what I would say is, instead of sort of sitting there saying, okay, well, I'm not dating and I'm not doing anything else, I would say focus on other aspects of your life that you want to strengthen. If you've had a personal, passion project that you haven't focused on, that you would love to work on, do that. If you have other interests that you haven't, been able to spend time doing, focus on that. And basically, or work on other friendships, so that when things are back to normal, you're coming out of the gate having built yourself up, so that you're going out there with all of those things that you have gained over that time.
A lot of very practical insight and advice. And I think it's one of these scenarios where I think people aren't talking, unless we talk about it out loud, unless people kind of problem solve this and kind of talk about what their anxieties might be, it may be hard to figure out some of these really practical suggestions that you're putting out there. Like, maybe don't get so hung up on the dating piece of it, and maybe that now isn't the time. Maybe there are other things you can be doing to develop yourself, or maybe there are ways of you understanding your own emotional reactions that you can build some resilience in this, and maybe come through stronger.
Yeah,
That's a
and I
good
would
point.
actually say, yeah, thanks. And what I would actually say is, I've had a lot of clients who have been, prior to COVID happening, were working a lot on themselves, and have been dating online and have been really successful at it. And I think part of what's made them so successful is that they're much more confident in who they are. So I wouldn't consider that as a wasted time if you spend time focusing on your own mental health and your own passions and interests.
Right. I think within the community, it's also a challenge, because there's certainly, online dating is a method, and speed dating now has picked up. I know our synagogue from Manhattan, Magen David of Manhattan, started, I think, the first of the speed dating kind of crazes that's been going around. And it's really great to know people are taking advantage of it. But the notion that some people are still feeling, but what's the point? Where is this even going? I think that's the message that you're delivering is really one to take into account, to consider. And also, I would ask you one more thing before we go on to the next panelist. We're actually in this turning point right now. Yeah, I mean, if we gave this talk 4 weeks ago, it was more of a doom and gloom sense of us. But now there is this opening that's happening. Now people are, New Jersey, 25 people are allowed to get together outdoors, and New York is loosening in different ways. So people are starting to get out, but still with this trepidation, still with some anxiety. I wonder if there's any advice you have for people now that they're going into this new state, where maybe, I actually had a conversation with a client today where we said, it feels like the slate is wiped clean. this whole experience of 3 months, it almost reset people's preconceived notions about dating and seeing, you know, and what it means to meet someone new. And so things have kind of been wiped clean, I feel. Do you have any thoughts about what it's like to get out there now?
So I don't know that that is necessarily specific for singles. I think all of us are going to be experiencing that, you know, like I almost, you know, like when I would talk about this with my clients, like I almost say it's almost like we're going to have like a PTSD reaction. Like we've been told, no, 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 this is bad. Don't go out. Don't touch people. Don't do this. Don't do that. And all of a sudden, you know, things are going to change, and everything that was no, no, no is all of a sudden going to be okay. And I think there's going to be an adjustment process that everybody's going to have to go through, and it's going to be different for everybody. And so I would say, as it relates to dating, there, you know, you can still be creative, right? Like maybe you'll do social distance in the park, maybe you'll do picnics, maybe you'll, you know, come up with interesting and creative ways to date while things aren't yet completely normal, but there's more, you know, flexibility with the things that you can do.
That's a great point. I think that's another way of looking at opportunity, how to create silver linings out of this, be creative, think out of the box, and you know, I think a lot of great advice. So let's thank you so much, Dr. Ayla. Let's move along to Simon. Simon, you spoke earlier about relationships. You talked about there being 3 kind of partitions of relationships. And one question that we had fielded earlier was about love. And you know, someone had asked, is love something that you can actually maintain during quarantine? How do you cultivate or maintain love during these awkward times?
So I do love this question. You know, if you look at love in the definition, 2020 decadent America, if love is a definition of negotiations, I give, I take, I just have to sort of just negotiate well. And if I give my time at home, then I'm going to have time to sort of spend with the boys. Or if sort of a wife says, you know, hey, I'll give up the first, first Friday night, you know, first by holiday by, you know, the in-laws, and you give me the first 2 weeks, you know, when we hit deal. So that kind of love for me is maintainable. It's a result, and yeah, you know, it's a GPA, and if we can sign a kind of, nowadays we have to negotiate, you know, it becomes a little bit more intense, and the stakes are higher. So yeah, that's possible. For me, I'm an old lover, so I demand more from love, and love for me is much more about connecting, bonding. It's passionate, and it's real, and it's together. You know, just thinking about that definition of old school love. When I was younger, I was in school and I was a bit of a wise guy, and the principal called me in and he said, you know what, I'm going to call your mother and I'm going to hear what she has to say. And there I was thinking, yes, you call my mother, because I know my mother loves me. But if you ask me the question, how do you know she loves you? I wouldn't even know how to answer how she loves me. But you know what? As a 7th grader, I said, you call my mother. So there he calls my mother, and I'm just waiting for it. And then my mother answers, you always pick on my son. It's the school. My son is the best thing in the entire world. And you know what I took from that? Love for me is making sure that I know that somebody has my back, that in my life, there is a rock. In that type of a definition of love, that's a lot harder, because our roles have changed. As husbands, we're all finding that the world that we were comfortable in, whether it's going to our shuls, whether it was going to work, whether it was giving our charities, whether it was being a CEO, or whatever that was, we no longer have that world. And the spouse that we looked at and the partner that we had may not understand that rock right now. Or you turn to a wife right now, struggling at the same level of, yes, my husband has been my rock, whether it's waking up in the morning and organizing the day and going out for lunch, or whatever that looks like, and seeing my friends and coming home at 4 o'clock to do the homework. And my husband walks in at 7, everything is beautiful. And I'm looking pretty and beautiful for the house. And he's excited to see me. I'm excited to see her. That rock is gone. And that's a lot more harder right now in these circumstances, in this crisis, to try and really, really figure out, how can I be there for my partner, and how can I give back that rock right now to my partner and that love?
Amazing. Amazing. Wow. Tour de force. It really, you know, to think about love, I think it's a great way to couch this conversation. And I think typically people come at things from a very clinical perspective, and your entry point is coming at it from with the solution up front, right? So love, and how to cultivate love, and how to understand that love, like you said, it's ideally in a relationship you're working with a what's the word, any of my panelists, where you don't need it to be returned for you, or you have a guarantee of that love. You have that sense.
So it's unconditional.
Unconditional love, right? So that's easy with children, right? Like you said, that's easy with children. But in a marriage, there's the challenge, right? Where, I had many clients tell me, my husband is home now and he's just driving me nuts. I get him out of here. Let him go to work. He can't go to work. He's stuck at home with you, with the children. Maybe their husband wasn't able to work because the work slowed down. And this caused a tremendous amount of difficulty, where that unconditional love may not always be given within relationships as it may be to the children in the family. Any quick words about how couples can navigate through those rocky moments, days, or weeks that have lasted?
Yeah, so, for me, and I can only tell you from my own personal and sort of sharing what's out there, what's working right now. I think, humans right now have become very judgmental and very narrow. I think, one of the biggest words out there in most homes is did you have to do it that way? And I think that's kind of what's going out right now. And that's because we're kind of very limited in our judgment. And we're left with just seeing our partners at kind of at their worst right now. And what's happening for me is, instead of that kind of line out there is did you have to do it that way? I would love an idea of being curious, being excited. I was sitting down a couple of nights and I'm in my bed and my wife is in her bed and we're playing on the phones, doing the kind of, just sort of the night thing. And I'm on my phone on Chase and I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to pay this bill and pay this credit card and navigate this? And there's my wife and she's kind of looking at furniture, garden furniture. And I turned to her and I wanted to say, are you kidding me? Like, hey, wake up. And then I caught myself and I said, hang on a second. I want to be excited about my wife. This is an opportunity. Maybe I want to hear, how does she shop? What kind of furniture does she choose? What's her colors? What's the menu? How does she make challah? All that kind of stuff. And guess what? I would love her to be in my world, in my new world, and create that rock and say, Simon, how do you juggle the finances? Oh my gosh, wow, there's so many accounts. How do you pay the school? How do you juggle it? So for me, it's about right now leaning into our partners, leaning into it and saying, show me you, show me who you are. Let me learn, because this is a wonderful opportunity. And I'm sharing that with my clients. Be excited about the new us right now. We may never have this opportunity to get excited and learn things about our partners that we never would. And thankfully, if we can tap into that and we can be curious, we can be excited, that's a love that's going to take us internally.
Yeah, beautiful. There's a concept out there called post-traumatic growth. Many of us have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. In the positive psychology literature, this concept of post-traumatic growth exists, where we understand that through hardships, and particularly strained hardships, people have the opportunity to tap into that challenge and see how they can utilize their resilience, their grit, to cultivate a new capacity for meeting those demands. And it doesn't necessarily, the literature talks about the fact that some people are resilient and quick in their resilience, meaning they face a trauma and fairly quickly, within 2 months or whatnot, a couple of weeks, they're able to see the light at the end of the tunnel immediately. They turn the corner and they're, all good and straight away. Those aren't the people that necessarily experience this post-traumatic growth. It's those who toil in it, who are challenged by it, who really face it and bring the best of themselves through that longer process of understanding, how can I develop through this challenging time? How can I grow and cultivate these newfound perspectives, skills, ways of communicating with my partner or my children? And I think we are all hearing a lot of that. And I think today, it's definitely one of our messages here from Bikor Cholim is to encourage people to look for that, to search for those opportunities for growth. With
And I
that,
think if I can just add something, that a lot of what I think is resonating with what Simon's saying is you're curious about your partner or your child or your spouse or another family member, and reminding yourself that to validate their experience, even if it's a different experience, right? So if your child is getting frustrated that they can't see their friends, on one hand, you might be thinking, oh, you can't see your friends. Like, I'm sitting working all day and trying to do school, but you're validating their experience. Like, this is really hard for you, and know that they're going through a different thing than you are, but still something really big at the same time. And I think that validation just lets the other person know, this is hard for you, it's hard for me, and I'm trying, whether it's curiosity or leaning in, that you're saying, like, I get it. I don't exactly get it, but I want to get it and I care.
yeah, and I think that's important for us to realize. That's not just adult communication. That's communication you can have with your 4-year-old.
For sure.
You can say that
I
to your
think we
4-year-old.
get afraid that we can't, and we can. We can say, this is hard.
Yeah.
This isn't fun.
Speaking of things that may be difficult and not fun, Rachel, this summer is quickly coming upon us. And
Yeah.
while I think many of us have struggled with parts of the school year being online and trying to occupy our children, at least they had something to occupy them with. Whereas now the summer is coming and we are still left with big questions about what will be. It is possible that there will not be camp. Or even if there is camp, there are some people that may opt not to send their children to camp for whatever particular personal reason they have. And that leaves us with this looming question of how to handle that open time, and will that add more anxiety to the thing, to our lives? What insights have you been providing people, or what have you been hearing in your circles about the summertime?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big unknown, and also I think we're getting more information. You know, some camps have clearly said they're not running, or programs are saying they're not running. Other camps are, but with a lot of pretty strict regulations. And so I think, and then I think some families are looking to other people to say, what should I do? And I think it's a very individualized decision, right? And again, going back to this idea of resilience, you know, I just found out just a couple of days ago that my son's sleepaway camp was canceled for the year. And I am very devastated, but I was anxious to tell him, the anxiety person anxious to tell him, and he's okay. You know, is it terrible right this minute? Sure. But in the scheme of things, we will find out a way to have some routine. It won't be the same routine as school, and we'll find out ways to socially distance, and I'll figure out a way to work and be with him. And I think, again, like, it's about doing what works, doing one thing at a time, you know, relying on routines, but flexibly, right? So there's a loosening naturally, but it's not the Wild West. And it's just a matter of sort of, again, like, it's a time for mindfulness and just kind of doing one thing at a time and sort of being in the moment. We can't really predict what August will be or September will be. But I think for kids, as we know information, we need to tell them in a way that's age appropriate, right? So when I knew, I took a day with my husband to say, oh, what are we going to say to my son? And then we said, we have some news. And you sort of say it factually and invite the curiosity around, what questions do you have? What do you think? Because I think as parents, sometimes we transmit anxiety without, you know, if we said, we have this terrible news for you, versus, I have news. He said, is it good? I was like, well, it's not great. It's about camp. And we explained it to him, and we showed him a video that the directors made. And we said, what questions do you have? What do you want to know? And then he was okay. And I think the other side of it is parents might worry, is he not worried enough? Should he be sad, more sad? And the truth is, it's okay. He's fine now. Maybe he'll feel sadder in a few weeks when he realizes it's not happening. But, you know, as a parent, you can kind of cope non-anxiously as much as possible and say, we'll figure out some fun stuff to do this summer. Like Ayla was saying, like, maybe we'll learn something new, or maybe we'll, like, if you're not going to date, you're going to do something else. So maybe we're not going to go to camp, but we'll do a different activity. And this too shall pass, as my 95-year-old grandmother says.
similar to what our 100-year-old grandmother loves to tell us.
They're
So,
all they have good pearls of wisdom.
They have the wisdom. So I'm going to follow up that with a question that just came in from our audience. And by the way, those who are watching on YouTube Live, feel free to type in questions. They are being sent over to us, and we're going to field a couple of them as we can, either now woven through or towards the end. But a question just came in that was pretty relevant. There are families that are heading to maybe a summer home, and maybe the home isn't, maybe it's a rental. It's not the home that they're used to being in. It's a new place for the children. It's small. They have anywhere from, 1 to 8 children, Simon. And what are the parents going to do, with 1 to 8 children, and I know that some of that is, you got to do research and you got to search for information, and it's going to be a big challenge, but any guidance, and this is open to anyone on the panel.
Yeah.
Rachel, you can start us off, but anyone can jump in.
I'll just say one thing and then I'd love to hear what other people think. But I think as a parent, sometimes we want to control a lot of things. We want it to be neat. We don't want it to make a mess, or we want it to be educational, or we want it to be good for all. And I think some of that's going to have to go out the window, right? I just kept thinking water, a hose, a lot of water, or a lot of chalk, or a lot of like running around a particular space, right? And I know I'm like, ooh, glitter, I don't think I'd like that so much. Or something like shaving cream, but you know what? Like those kinds of things actually go a long way. So I think trying to figure out a combination of physical and like more calm, some kids do really well with calmer activities and some kids really need to move around. But I think having kindness to yourself around like, if it's messy, we can wash it. Again, my grandmother would say that's what washing machines are for. But like really for those who feel like they need to control their space or the mess, just being like, you know what, I guess there'll be a lot of water or a lot of slime or a lot of whatever. Because I think that'll actually help, even just in that little bit of like humor, I think can help.
Great advice. Great advice. Any other panelists
Definitely.
want to jump in?
I just wanted to add, like, piggybacking on the idea of, things loosening and, I think as parents, we do have this sense of like, what would be best for my children? And I think at this time we were like, oh, well, they're not in school, so I have to teach them everything they would have learned or they'll be behind. Oh, they're not in sports. Okay, time to be coach and teach them how to dribble and we might be going into like this hyper control. And I'm kind of excited, like if we want to look back, I hope when we look back 2020, we see this time as like the exposure to perfectionism and the idea that like we just couldn't do it and everybody was okay. Right?
That's
we just
right.
couldn't do everything perfect because we're not capable. We are human, and something's not going to be amazing, and some days there's going to be a mess, and some days they're not going to learn anything, and our kids are still going to grow up and they're still going to be okay. So there's just another
I think
thought.
that's such a good point. It's such a good point because I think you're right in this idea that we have to be the teacher and that there's a thing we teach, whereas really it's our interactions, right? Those are all teachable moments. Or for little ones, I've gotten a lot of questions around, are they going to learn motor skills and language? And they are. They're going to hear us talking. They're going to see us, pouring juice into a container and see it gets full and empty. And so all those learning and the language and the motor skills, it's all there. It doesn't have to be handed. But I love that idea. We're going to be okay through this whole thing.
Yeah, I think the idea of trying to take a run at perfectionism and try to reduce our expectations of having it to be perfect. And that some of us have that personality, some of us don't. Some of us aren't at all oriented towards it has to be perfect. And finding that balance between you and, if we're talking about a family, you and your partner, you and your spouse, how you can manage that is important. And on that note, we had another question earlier that kind of I've been holding in my mind about, again, yes, please put your questions and answers into the chat. This way we can field them. So someone also asked, how do we create balance with our own time, right? So how do I split personal mom or dad time and time with my spouse and children time? how do we capture some time for ourselves during, again, such busyness? And I think Simon, you may get the ability to answer the baton on this one, since none of us can figure, 10 people in the home. How do you make time for yourself?
I wish I knew the answer. I guess, I would start by saying I too am struggling with that. I think, rituals are super important here. I think the more that we can sort of keep our rituals, for me in the couple world, I am encouraging couples and really making an emphasis, still look beautiful, still make sure your home is running right, still trying to clean it, still trying to find that time. For me, at the same time as space, I think every individual needs their own private space. Everyone has to have a little bit of space in their own home, which is very safe. When we find ourselves sort of finding that this is getting too much, take that space and don't feel guilty about it. Your children need you, your family needs you. This is not the time to sort of get caught in your own sort of emotion. And boundaries as well. I think it's super important to make sure that boundaries are really set and things are really in place.
I think, and I also would add that I think sometimes kids get used to like one parent doing something. And so if they see, let's just pretend they see mom and they go to ask her a question, they don't know to like this, they might need to hear, hey guys, actually mom is going into the bedroom for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, however, if you need something, ask dad, ask your older brother, right? And vice versa, right? Maybe they're doing something with dad, but they see the other adult around. I think creating a boundary, and sometimes for our younger kids, we actually create like a traffic light with red or yellow or green. And like, if it's on red, that means I'm not accessible to you right now. Because kids are kind of used to going often to the same person for something. And so helping to create the boundary by saying like, I'm actually not available right now. Please ask your brother or dad or mom, so that so we can like help them. And kids do really well with repetition. So they'll get it after a couple of rinses and repeats. But unfortunately, sometimes the first couple times there's an escalation, and that's really normal because kids just are used to like, you don't want to pull the rug out without like, they're going to try to say, oh, this isn't how it usually is. But if you say, actually, I'm taking a half an hour for myself. What? Yeah, I'm going to take a shower. I'm going to put my feet up. Or dad, you actually can't bother him right now. He's taking some time for himself. It's like, it's important to show the kids and explain to them because they need to know it's important for them too.
I agree. I think that's great advice. And it also models for the children this notion that you also can have that time for yourself.
That's right.
And we should encourage them to take that time for themselves
Right.
in whatever way works for them, in their room playing with their toys, or if they're older kids having some space to themselves, if they want the television room to themselves. We have to try to negotiate that with the rest of the family so that everyone understands we value space and boundaries.
Right.
A question came
David,
in. I know, Ayla,
No, I was just going to add, I believe that if time is a crunch, which I know for me, a lot of days I find that it's hard to even find the space for me time. David and I went to a talk by Tal Ben-Shahar, who is a major teacher of positive psychology, and I remember, and I might be botching the details to the detail, but the main idea was that this corporate business wasn't able to get time to themselves. They weren't able to take a half hour for mindfulness or meditation. And they ended up doing a research study on them. And they reported that even taking 30 seconds to take deep breaths ended up showing that they all showed a decrease in the amount of stress they were feeling. And so I've been taking those moments, right? If I have 2 minutes between one client to the next, I'll go outside, I'll close my eyes, and I'll take a few deep breaths and maybe pretend I'm somewhere else, and a mindful vacation. And it makes a difference.
I think it's such a good point, because this idea, I had it in my mind that self-care means a spa day, and it doesn't, right? So I know this is very silly, I keep drinking water, but for me, hydrating is really important. And if I don't have the bottle in front of me, I don't do it. But I think those 2 moments or 5 minutes, or just, if you're working in front of a computer, a stretch, do some arm hand movements. It sounds kind of hokey, but very important for,
Right.
for
You're
our
showing
mind and
yourself.
body.
Right. You're showing yourself that you matter. And so taking those few seconds for yourself matters.
Mhm.
And it gives you a new renewed energy.
Absolutely. Can
Yeah, I
I,
would add
David, can I?
that yeah, just one point about breath work in particular that you mentioned. There was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal. It was more of I think it was a commentary about the healing power of proper breathing. And it cited a study, I'll read it here, that said a 70-year research program which focused on heart disease gathered 2 decades worth of data from over 5,000 adults. And they crunched the numbers and discovered the greatest indicator of lifespan wasn't genetics, diet, or the amount of daily exercise, as many might have expected. It was lung capacity. Larger lungs equaled longer lives. And the notion is that through breathing, through taking time to work on your breathing, you're actually creating so much benefit to your physiological state and to your emotional, mental state. So we're talking
Such
about
a
deep
good-
breathing is not just, right, this is breathing up here, but then there's breathing down into the belly, right? Doing a little demonstration, right? Breathing into the belly, okay, is a different type of a breath. So we encourage people to do just slowing down even now for a moment. If you just take a quick second at home and see if you can breathe into your belly by stretching out the muscles of your belly. And we try to do that in a count of 4 or 5 seconds. So as you breathe in, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I like to hold it for a couple of seconds, 3, 4, 5, and then exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and repeat. If you do that simple breath, I know we're doing it in a consolidated way here because time is, we don't have as much time here, but that type of a slow breathing, just count in your mind, 4 or 5 counts, inhale, hold it, exhale, even hold it out. That's 3 or 4 breaths a minute. That for 1 minute, as Ayla was saying, can change your whole hour. 1 minute can change the other 59 minutes that you were in. Is it going to make you floating on the clouds for the next 17 hours? No, probably not. But for that brief period of time, it can regain and recalibrate you.
Yeah. I saw a really good question, and I was hoping I could jump on that if that's okay.
Go for
I
it.
like this question about how to handle taking rules from dad, who maybe isn't usually around. They're not used to dad doing the parenting, and I think it's such a good question because in my mind, I'm picturing dad trying to come in and set some limits with really good intentions, and the kids maybe being like, this isn't what usually happens. That's not how we do it at home, or I'm going to go to mom, right? And sometimes it's just easier to go to, let's say, mom, and mom to be like, oh, it's just faster if I do it. But I think it's actually a really nice moment to practice. And it might, again, sound like, do I really take a few minutes to say, no, actually, this is dad is telling you to bring the plates to the table. And do I really need to say that? But actually, yes, right? So it's great to say, we're practicing being a little bit different. And it's actually great practice. It helps your partner feel very validated and that they have a legitimacy in that relationship. And you can say to your parents, or you can say to the kids, let's practice. And then the great thing about kids is they respond really well to positive reinforcement and attention. So say, I love that we're trying things a different way. Like dad's helping you get ready for dinner. And I love that you're listening to him bring your plates to the table. Again, sounds really silly, but the kids will do well when they see it's a different way. And then your dad feels powerful and good, and you as the mom feel like, great, we're switching roles a little bit, and the kids are like, oh, we can be flexible here. And it just practices being flexible, which I think we've all sort of talked about in all of these different roles, is how to be flexible during this time.
I think that brings up another question, Rachel. Thank you. That came in as we've been speaking about, I guess we can couch it in flexibility. So Ayla, I'm going to direct this one towards you. Young adults that are living at home, siblings. There's actually 2 questions. I'm going to present both, and you can choose which one you want to take, and then we'll field the other one afterwards. So young adults that are home, either one scenario is they just graduated high school, they just graduated college, they just finished up, grad school, or they're about to go into the job market, and here we go, everything just flips upside down and inside out, and they are feeling not just hopeless, but as if the world has completely ended, doom and gloom. They don't have enough world experience to maybe see cycles of things. So that's question one. And then the second one was, among those young adults at the home, what happens when they're not even getting along with each other, and they're just giving each other such a hard time and causing a hard time for everybody else? I kind of like the first question first, and maybe we'll get to the second one, but
okay. Works for me. So I would say, first of all, I would just, validate that it is really tough, right? I think all of us, went through college and then got to think about, 4 years of hard work, and then I get to go to my graduation, and this is what it's like, and I get to celebrate with all of my friends that I made, and it's something that you've looked forward to for so long. So just to validate that it is hard, and that it is hard that things didn't happen the way that we planned, and at the same time, some of the anxieties are valid, right? We were talking about before, like what anxieties are based in fact and what anxieties aren't. But what anxieties aren't based in fact is that you'll never find a job, or that nobody's hiring, right? There are still people who are hiring. It might not be the job that you dreamed of, or things might have shifted a little bit, but not to assume that just because things are difficult now, that means that things will forever be difficult in terms of finding a job. And, it reminds me of actually when I graduated college, I was in finance at the time. And I actually started working in finance during the crash of 2008. And at that time, it was a similar experience of a lot of my friends losing their jobs, a lot of people, being afraid about finances and what their next steps are going to be. And at that point, things shifted, and we're here today. And what happened in 2008, we got through it. And even personally for me, it was a moment where I realized that finance was not for me, and being on the phone with my clients and sharing with them all of, I know how hard this is. I realized I was being a therapist in finance, and it was a whole life-changing moment where I never would have ended up in psychology. So I imagine we're also going to find a lot of hindsight 2020 being a lot of positive silver linings that we just can't see right now.
I think that's great advice. I selfishly look to Ayla's story and say I'm grateful for that, because we ended up meeting each other because of that path that happened. So we don't know, and this, I'm sure you hear this, we hear this from spiritual leaders as well, from our rabbis and teachers will tell us, Gam zu l'tova. It's such a hard thing to wrap your head around, but it's a dictum, it's a statement that has very powerful psychological implications to it. It's hard to understand everything in the big picture and see it all. But if we tell ourselves I'm gonna work through this, again, getting back to that post-traumatic growth, I'm gonna find a way to persevere. I'm gonna even utilize gratitude. And that's a technique that practically to our audience out there, I wanna suggest that almost on a nightly basis, and the research has supported this, if you take a moment at night or in the morning and make a list of 3 things that you're grateful for, and you do this consistently, even at minimum 3 times or even 1 time a week, you will see significant shifts in your overall self-perceptions, in your levels of anxiety, levels of depression, because gratitude creates a counterweight. So if I'm feeling down and stressed and anxious and I'm feeling very heavy, when I think about, well, that's all there, I'm not minimizing it, but what am I grateful for? Maybe it's my health, maybe it's my family, maybe it's my loved ones, maybe it's this opportunity, maybe it's this new learned experience, and it starts to counterweight. And if you do it repeatedly, it has a big impact. I had my students at Baruch do this along with meditation, along with resiliency journaling, and their reports were, and we did this all through COVID, all through the quarantine, and the students reported such significant benefit from those activities that our audience at home should take it seriously. Gratitude, a little bit of mindfulness and meditation, talk to our breathing techniques, cultivating the post-traumatic growth. Okay, I think at this point, let's turn our attention to the Q&A. I'm very grateful for our panel that has given us great insight thus far to a wide range of conversations and topics. In the meantime, as people are putting other questions in the chat, we had one other question that I mentioned to Ayla about sibling rivalry. Maybe, I don't know who wants to field this one. Maybe Simon, you want to jump in on this one? Sibling rivalry, how can people deal with that at home?
As you said, it's not, I'm still on the love thing, so the relationship, but I think I'll turn that away and defer it to the doctor.
Okay.
Well, you know what I think what's interesting about the sibling rivalry question is I think what I saw is that it's not just rivalry as the little ones, right? But if you have, let's say, young adults who are home and having rivalry, I think it just speaks to, a couple of things, which is this idea of leading from validation. So as a parent, you might be like, I can't believe I have my 18-year-old and my 20-year-old and they're arguing, aren't they adults, right? And can't they just stop arguing? And on the other hand, if you say to yourself something like, this must be really hard for them. This isn't what they expected, right? Or college, the semester is over early, or, they were expecting to be doing, camp counseling this summer, or they were going on a trip, and this has got to be really hard, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you don't want to step in and say, hey guys, like, I really wish that we could kind of come together, validate each other's experiences, or just know that it's hard, but we got to collaborate and figure out a way to have boundaries with each other or respect each other. But I think that our first inclination would be to just say, hey guys, cut it out. When in fact, probably the first thing is, oh this isn't what you signed up for, right? So it's hard. And I think when we lean in with the validation, it makes it easier to collaborate, because then you're saying, I get it. I know this isn't what you wanted, or this is hard, or yes, I know you love your brother, but you guys are kind of at each other's throats. So I think leading with the validation then helps people be open to solutions.
Okay, good advice. I think one theme we have been hearing throughout this talk today is validation. That's an important technique, and we in the industry, we call it a technique. We lean in by validating, and we take it for granted. But not many people may not realize how important it is to, at the first wave of response, is that validation, letting them know, we know this is hard. Of course, this is difficult. It must be challenging in ways that I can't even understand. I don't even have the depth of knowing your 22-year-old life or 17-year-old life, but I can see at the very least that it's challenging and how much it's hard for you. Yeah. Yeah, Ayla, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it happens to be that these young adults are watching, or there are other young adults watching now who are in that situation, I'd also, like them to thinking of ways that they and their sibling are similar. Just in general, we tend to want to be closer to people who we can find similarities with. And so if they can think about, yeah, there's a lot of differences between us, but there's also a lot of similarities. And I imagine there are, given that their environments were the same, and, they grew up with the same parents and all of that, maybe they have common interests, or even like the same TV shows, just finding some common ground that they can focus their attention on. And maybe know also if there are hot topics, to try to just not talk about them, right? Like, you don't have to discuss the areas that the two of you are always going to disagree on and aren't necessarily open to seeing the other person's perspective. But if you are, that's another way of approaching it, is being open to not necessarily being wrong, but being open to the idea that there are multiple ways of viewing the same situation.
Just, just a quick thought, just adding to the idea of validation in terms of younger couples. I shared with you earlier, right now, it's kind of the demographic right now. Relationships are really struggling right now. And I think if I have to sort of say what that is, it's just, a lack of validation, and how important that is right now, where these younger couples can't get it. They can't get it for themselves. They don't know where to find it from each other. So I would say another key element in this validation is just thinking about it and sharing with some of these parents of these young couples. Can you take that role? Can you validate your child or your married, when they turn to you, and sort of validate that and normalize it, and give them a lot of hope, and try and spin what they're hearing. It's not about, oh my gosh, he did that. Oh my, that type of thing to a very vulnerable couple right now is really, really, really hard and hurtful. And in a world of doubt right now, where I'm waking up to the stranger, like, who are you? I don't know you. We were married and we were just meant to enjoy life. And all of a sudden, there's this thing next to me, and it's not the man I married or not the female I married. But this is a call out and a shout out to siblings and parents of these couples right now. They need tons of validation. If you can give it to them, and more, because they don't have it, and their partner's not giving it to them. And not having it right now is creating a lot in and of itself of them starving from that love, and really doubtful about who they are right now and where they are.
Mm-hmm.
I think on that note, I think it's important now, as we kind of head towards our conclusion of this panel, maybe we'll just one more point, but I'm going to state what I might assume is the obvious, but maybe it isn't obvious. If anyone at home listening to this now live, or listening to any of the recordings that may go out, finds that either you or a child or your spouse or an older child or an older adult, anyone in your life is struggling to a degree where they are overwhelmed and they cannot maintain their sense of balance for many days in a row, or where their capacity for functioning has diminished for many days, for several days in a row, or for a week or more in a row, or 2 weeks of not being able to meet their basic duties, or even if things become very dangerous for someone, where their depression may get so dark that they are maybe self-harming, or maybe using substances more than they normally would or should. There are ways that we can still reach out and get help. Just because the world did kind of shutter in, the mental health world did not. The mental health world has remained open for assistance, and there are many different ways and avenues to reach out for that help. Certainly here at Bikor Cholim, we have the mental health resource division, where you can call the mental health resource line, and you can seek some information and guidance from the mental health resource line, which may provide you with perhaps a referral out to one of the clinicians within the community. Maybe they might refer you to the Child Mind Institute. We have, Dr. Busman here from Child Mind, which is an amazing organization, or many of the clinicians from within the community. And even within Bikor Cholim itself, we have a mental health clinic. It's quite busy, and there are many people that we're dealing with. We're seeing more activity than ever before. The numbers that we're dealing with are higher than ever in our history. But if the fit is there, maybe that's a place that you might be able to get help also. But don't just stay home and do nothing.
Right.
Don't just assume that you can get through it and maybe it'll wash away. It's okay to reach out and at least inquire and ask questions. And I'll say one more thing in terms of medication. People ask, how do I know? Maybe with medication is my answer. That too is a question you could pose to a mental health professional. Maybe medication is something you might need for your depression or anxiety or other symptoms that you're dealing with, but that's to be determined by a mental health professional in that same evaluation process.
Yeah, and I think just the fact that this conversation is happening hopefully destigmatizes this and puts mental health in a conversation, because I think of it, I think we all are similar in thinking mental health is health. And so, if you're struggling, you don't have to be. There are people to help. Telehealth is actually thriving and doing really well, and is helping people have access and reducing barriers. So it is important to know that while we started by saying it's an unprecedented time, your point is so well taken to say that it also doesn't have to be suffering. There are people to help and lots of resources to do that.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Actually, we'll use that as is that okay, Rachel? I'm going to make that, we're going to head towards closing remarks. Is there anything else? Is that a sufficient closing remark, or is there anything else you want to add as a closing?
I think just to say that that it really is a tough time, and kids are resilient and adults are resilient too. And there are lots of resources out there, for parents and for kids and teenagers who are struggling with mental health disorders, and we should access those resources, whether it's just getting information or even seeking a mental health evaluation. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Again, one last plug to Dr. Busman and as well as the Child Mind Institute. I
Thank
am near and dear to my heart. I trained with many of
Yeah.
Dr. Busman's colleagues, and they are an unbelievable organization in locations in Manhattan, as well as in Westchester.
San Mateo.
San Mateo. Where's San Mateo?
In California.
Oh, okay. I don't know that any of us are going to get
But
there. So
we're all
quickly.
borderless right now, so.
That's true. That's true. Great. Thank you. Simon, do you want to take a closing remark?
Yeah, I guess, just sort of the one thing that sort of stuck out for me and I learned today is in every, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a child, whether it's a single, the idea of what we want to say is we're here with you. Let's be hopeful. For us, there are really good things, and we could focus on all the things that are not happening right now. But I will tell you, there's a lot of great things happening. A lot of relationships, there's a lot of dating. One of my actually good friends who's older has actually got engaged and getting married in 2 weeks. So there's incredible good news out there. For me, it's about sort of just opening up our eyes and being there for each other and laughing and enjoying. We want to be laughing at these times right now. And if our relationship sort of has to take a turn, like I said, the good news is I told my wife, we're in contract here. Nothing is going to be said, in the law of court. And we booked a holiday. I said, we're going to repair and, on the beach and laugh about whatever we've done. So there are good things out there, and we're here for you guys. We're here. SBH is here. The community is filled, whether it's our rabbis, our community leaders, us. Turn to us. We're here. And the good thing about mental health right now is you don't even have to turn up. You can be in your bedroom having a cup of tea and an English cup of tea with milk, I should say, and having a Zoom session just for a little bit of advice, a little bit of a tweak here or there can make a huge difference right now.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Dr. Ayla Sid, any final thoughts or remarks to share with the audience?
Yes. Before I get to my final remarks, there's one thought that came to my mind, and I just feel like it's worth mentioning because I've heard it enough from enough clients that I think it's on a lot of people's minds is social media. And I just would like to say that we shouldn't take social media to mean that everybody is doing okay except for me. Social media pictures that are put up, it's really just a snippet, and it's not the whole picture. And to try really hard not to look at those pictures and assume that you're doing much worse by comparison. It really isn't their real story. It's not their real life. It's just the moment. And if they caught that moment and they were smiling, great. I'm sure we're all having moments where we're smiling. That doesn't mean that they're also not having moments where they're struggling too. So that was just a side point that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned. But
it's a great point. Before you get to
really
concluding,
good point.
It's a really good point, and one that there is research that is coming out now, even though this has been a 3-month run, and the research clearly is pointing to social media as something that's exacerbating people's anxiety and stress levels, partially because of what Ayla, you're describing, that people are feeling like, oh, I'm the only one, and everyone out there with their stories or pictures is doing great, but also because of the amount of negative information that's being shared through media and social media, and the overload by which people are being exposed. And that is something that we recommend to take a break from. You must take a break from social media, and even the news stations, whether it be television or radio. Find once a day, read a newspaper or read an article, and get your news fill once a day, once every other day. Nothing's changing that drastically here, guys. And give yourself a diet from all of that, because it's not really adding as much as you think it is. It's just filling that kind of addictive need to always be in the know, but it ultimately is not as beneficial as we think. So please, we'll add that to the other advice: reduce social media and general media use. Now, Ayla, closing remarks?
Yeah, I would just say, like, closing remarks would just be, that it is a challenging time. And at the same time, I think if we all think back to past experiences we've had, this isn't our first run with challenge. We've been through challenges in the past and we've gone through them. And so, you know, being able to view this as another challenge, maybe a different challenge, maybe a challenge, one of the hardest challenges we've had, but you know, I think overall people are pretty resilient and we'll get through it. And I think that hopefully, you know, in a year from now or even a few months from now, we'll be able to look back at this time and be really proud of ourselves for what we accomplished in a time that was so challenging.
Thank you for those thoughts. And I'd like to encourage everyone, and as we head towards the final wrap up, after we kind of disappear from the screen, you'll see contact information for all of the clinicians that were able to be with us today. And I'm really grateful for everyone's time, not only for the three panelists, but also to everyone behind the scenes at Bikor Cholim, who worked tirelessly to get this event and many events out there to the community for our benefit, whether it be the doctors series or the mental health series, or certainly the fundraising efforts that are going on, the auction that's coming up. I believe it's on June 8th. That's something to look out for. There's just so much going on at Bikor Cholim that I encourage you to avail yourselves of the information, of the events, of the activities, because knowing that we have such a solid framework behind us and such a great safety net behind us in this community really can help us sleep just a little bit better at night. And so I'm grateful to everyone who's helped us. So in conclusion, I'd like to just say that we covered many topics and we tried in this event to give you the full spectrum of life. We started talking about children and adolescents with Dr. Busman. We talked about young adults, young professionals, the dating world, how to deal with those challenges that might come up with Dr. Ayla Sit. Simon Nasim gave us the breakdown of relationships from young married couples who are struggling with this, with being newlyweds in this strange time, to veteran married couples all the way through with children that they have to navigate through the different dynamics. And we talked about resiliency. We talked about the ability to enhance communication. We talked about the need to set boundaries. We talked about the power of a breath, taking 1 minute of conscious deep breathing to reset your physiological, emotional, and mental state. We talked about gratitude and the importance of reflecting on what is going well in your life. Even though that might seem so difficult, you can do it if you just spend a little bit of mental energy towards it. You can even be grateful for the fact, our tefillot are filled with it. The fact that my pinky goes like this. I can be grateful for that. And for that night, that can be something that changes my mindset entirely. We just need to do our best not to take what is available to us for granted. We also alluded to the fact that there can be more severe mental difficulties, anxieties, depression, trauma, and that there is help available, and that we encourage people to reach out for help, whether it be directly through Bikor Cholim's mental health resource clinic or through other networks that you might be connected to, or Child Mind Institute as one example, New York CBT, where Dr. Ayla Sit works, my own clinic, Simon's clinic, anywhere all around there is help. Just reach out and avail yourself of it. Finally, Ronnie Towell, who is our MC, our host of the night, doing the introductions. We thank Ronnie for his time and dedication to this event and to Bikor Cholim. And please share this link with other people once it comes out. We plan to launch a few other series, a few other talks over the weeks and months ahead, focusing on mental health in more discrete areas. So we'll focus on children for one night. We'll focus on young married couples in one night, so on and so forth, as we continue to provide the community and the audience out there with resources. That'll be it for tonight. Again, we'll put up the contact information on the screen. Thank you for joining us. Whatever else the back end needs to put up there, that's where the contact information is. Take a moment. Take note of some of those contact email addresses. I don't know if there's any other slide that we need to show. Okay, there you have it. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe below to our YouTube channel for updates on future webinars and more. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and wish everyone a safe holiday and meaningful holiday coming.